can tell them I'm the bad guy if it helps you sleep okay, because all you want is closure.
Hey everyone, if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, then it's great to see you again. So there's a short story behind today's video that I'd like to share with you. A couple of weeks ago, Alexander23, who is one of the producers behind Olivia Rodrigo's hit song called Good For You, released this song called Hate Me If It Helps. And yeah, I really liked it, so I went to Spotify to see if anybody helped him write or produce this song. So I clicked on credits, and which name do I see? Olivia Rodrigo. So Olivia co-wrote this song, and her producer Dan Nigro actually co-produced this song. And I think you can really hear their influences on this song. And if you listen really carefully, you can even hear Olivia do some backing vocals here and there, which is awesome. So how does this relate to this week's video? Well, I recreated Hate Me If It Helps, and then I somehow got in touch with this really talented singer and songwriter called JULAPINK after she reached out to me on Instagram. We had a really nice chat, and then I asked her, hey, would you be interested in covering this Alexander23 song for one of my YouTube videos? She said yes, and then she absolutely nailed the vocals, which I'm really grateful for. So please give her a follow on Instagram and her other socials, because she's awesome and she really deserves it. And yeah, that's how we ended up with this week's video. So even though this is originally a song by Alexander23, it is co-written by Olivia Rodrigo, which is why today I'll be showing you how to produce this song. So without any further ado, let's actually dive into the session. As you can probably see, there's quite a few guitars in this session, but before we dive into the more technical aspects behind these guitars, let's take a look at the melodies and chord progressions played by this picked acoustic guitar over here. So the song starts with a pretty straightforward progression, which is a 4-6-5, and please notice how I'm strumming the chords in the piano roll to actually resemble the strumming on a real guitar using the strum tool, which you can find using Alt+S on your keyboard. Then in the pre-chorus, our progression changes to a 2-3-4, which indicates that something's happening. You can feel the tension building, and then our chords eventually resolve in a 4-1-5 progression in the chorus. And this is where the melody also becomes a lot more rhythmic and powerful. So it's cool to note that this D, which by the way is the root note of this song, is played throughout the entire melody, which really connects these three different chords as they now all feature this one common note, which is D. And also note that I'm using these notes down here for upstrokes and downstrokes, which are custom to this contact library I'm using called Picked Acoustic. And these notes really help improve the transitions between different chords, as they really replicate the sound of switching between strings on a real guitar, which is something I really love about this library. So within this library, we're using a finger-picked guitar with fret position 0, recorded on a condenser microphone with some EQ applied internally already. But as you may notice, the guitar has a bit of a dark characteristic to it. So here's how we're going to mitigate that and make it more exciting. I'm starting with the capitator, which is an extremely useful tool to create a more dominant, present and forward presentation of any sound. And that was exactly the goal here, being that this is the main sound the listener focuses on throughout the verse, the pre and also the chorus. Afterwards, I've applied an instance of one knob brighter from Waves, which is used in order to open up the guitar a bit more, and in essence this highlights some of the upper mid and higher frequencies in order to really make the guitar shine and stand out, which could have probably been achieved with an equalizer as well, but this one knob plugin is just extremely efficient and it sounds good, so I figured why not use that. Then I've applied some compression to even out the volume between the loudest and quietest parts of our guitar, which just makes it sound better and more consistent within our mix. Next, we want to make sure that the guitar sounds warm and natural, which is why we're applying an instance of R-Bass from Waves, which I usually apply to bass instruments that need that extra bit of low-end warmth and body. I've then applied some EQ in order to remove any frequencies we don't need, especially below like 70 Hz, as that region would only interfere with our kick and bass, which we do not want. And finalizing the chain, we have the S1 imager from Waves to create a wider guitar sound, which in turn creates more space for the elements in the center of our mix, like the vocals, the kick and the bass. So in the pre-chorus, as said before, we really start to feel the tension rising, and one way to achieve that feeling is by introducing a more pacing rhythm played on a different guitar. So a rule of thumb I recommend to keep your productions interesting is to either add, modify, or remove new elements every like 4 or 8 bars, as that allows your listener's brain to stay interested as it gradually observes new information. And this doesn't have to be complex at all. It can literally be as simple as adding a hi-hat, a percussion loop, or adding a very subtle guitar layer that plays an ever so slightly different rhythm, like we're doing here. So I'm actually using an exact copy of the main verse guitar, with one difference being that this layer has a vintage verb to make it feel more dreamy, and the other difference is that it plays each chord's root note in a paced rhythm, which is the component that really subtly creates more tension as we build toward the chorus. And to make this pre-chorus section even more dreamy, I'm using this synth pad from the free Labs plugin that is simply playing the pre's chord progression, which sounds really soothing because of the amount of reverb applied within the plugin itself. So when we arrive at the chorus, I'm using 2 more synth pads from this amazing Labs plugin, and both of these seem really simple in the sense that they just play the D major chord throughout, but they add so much atmosphere and even emotion to the chorus, which makes this one of the simplest and yet one of my favorite production tricks ever, as in my opinion these pads add some really good ear candy to the production. So we talked about these synth pads being introduced in the chorus, but there is a couple of other new elements that are being introduced here, like this bass guitar and sub kick, both adding a lot of movement and further excitement to the chorus, which also extends on the point I was making earlier about increasing the tension and keeping your arrangements interesting by adding new elements. So I'm using the retro 60s for the bass guitar, which is a great sound in itself, which also meant there wasn't much processing needed to be done other than an instance of R bass, which helps highlight the warmth in its low end, and an EQ to remove any unnecessary rumble below 30 Hz and to make the bass feel a little lighter and less bloated using these subtle cuts between 120 and 200 Hz. Now with the kick that comes in, I'm using a sample from Splice, which is actually named after me, and I swear that's not why I'm using it. And you'll notice that a lot of the highs and the mids have been filtered out in order to keep the focus on the guitars and the vocals, which creates this really cool effect, almost as if you're listening to the kick while you're standing outside a club or a studio. Now processing wise, I'm applying some compression to tame some of that excess boom, which helps create the impression of a punchier kick. I've also applied a DS10 drum shaper to further extend on the attack of the kick, which ensures that each hit cuts through the mix in between each of the elements. And finally, I've applied an equalizer to serve as a filter, practically removing all of the kick's high and mid frequencies. So alongside the bass and the kick, we're also greeted by a piano in the second half of the chorus, which is the LA custom cinematic patch from Keyscape. And this one just follows the chords to really support the rest of the instruments in this section. So to get these keys to sound right, I'm using this piano mixing plugin by Greg Wells called Piano Centric, which really adds a sense of life to our piano. And I'm also applying some dynamic EQ inside Pro Q3, which removes some of the piano's mod at around 200 Hz. And as we almost reach my favorite part of the production, we're also slowly introducing this cool drum and bass loop from Splice using an automation clip that slowly opens up the filter to add even more tension, which is then complemented by this uplifter, which basically indicates, hey, we're going somewhere else. And where we're going exactly is, in my opinion, the most interesting and exciting part in this production, which is this awesome electric guitar section. So to create this monstrosity, we're going to need a few layers, especially electric guitars. Now I'm using my beloved Electric Sunburst library in Kontakt that we've all come to know by now, as I'm basically using it in every session and video. And actually I'm using like 5 layers of this plugin to get a really solid guitar sound, which I've processed all together on one chain, being this guitar bus. So I'm starting this bus chain with one knob fatter by Waves to, you guessed it, make our guitars sound fatter. Then I'm using one knob brighter to open up the sound a bit in terms of high frequencies. There is a glue compressor which helps glue together all the individual guitar sounds. We're then using Soothe to get rid of any harshness, especially within the 2 to 4000 Hz region. There is an EQ to roll off any rumble, as there were quite a lot of lows in the guitars that we did not really need. And finally we're using Vintage Verb, my go-to reverb plugin, to just add a ton of atmosphere to our guitars. And crucially, I'm automating the mix level of this reverb plugin to make sure that this big reverb stops as soon as our guitars stop playing. And that just makes for a tighter and more contrasting transition between this huge electric guitar section on the one hand and this more intimate, quiet acoustic guitar section on the other hand. So besides the electric Sunburst guitars, I'm also using a couple of other layers, like this guitar from the Ilya Efimov library. I'm also using both synth pads that were already introduced before to add some atmosphere. I'm using the retro 60s bass guitar, the cinematic piano, which I, by the way, exported to audio, just like the guitars, to make sure that my CPU is able to handle the session. And then there is these subtle short strings from the Session Strings Pro 2 library in Kontakt that add some extra drama and attack to this heavy guitar section. And then we still needed the section to be a little more powerful, which is why we're using the same filtered subcake again, but we're introducing two crash layers that just add a lot of energy and power, which we can especially hear once we disable them. So by now we've discussed most of the elements featured in this session, but there's still one element we haven't discussed yet, which are the vocals. And as we unfold this group, we see that Jula recorded an insane number of layers that all support the lead vocal. And yeah, there's like 100 things I could say to express how much I like this, but I think the best way to do so is if we just take a second and listen to these harmonies, both soloed and in conjunction with the lead vocal.
You can tell them I'm the bad guy if it helps you sleep okay. Because all you want is closure, but there's nothing left to say. You can tell them I'm the bad guy if it helps you sleep okay. Because all you want is closure, but there's nothing left to say. So you can hate me if it helps.
Just incredible. So Jula actually did most of the tuning and mixing herself, including EQ and compression, which I really appreciate. So the only thing left for me to add was some reverb. So I'm routing all vocal channels to a vocal bus, and I'm sending this vocal bus to a reverb send channel using the sidechain to this track option to then select this reverb send channel inside an instance of Fruity Send. And by doing this, we've basically duplicated our vocal bus. And on this clone, I'm using a reverb that is 100% wet so that it does not contain any of the vocal's dry signal, which could have caused phasing issues. And then we can either use the channel's volume fader to determine how much reverb we want to hear, or we can use this volume knob in Fruity Send, which is what I chose to do. And what I did specifically was automating this knob because I wanted the verse to be completely dry, so no reverb at all. Then I wanted the pre and the first part of the chorus to feature a little bit of reverb. And finally, I wanted the part where all the harmonies come in to be drowned in reverb, which is where I'm really opening the Send's volume knob using this automation clip. And that concludes the vocal as well as this video. Now, if you've made it this far, I wanted to say I really appreciate you dedicating a part of your day to watching this video, as I know how valuable your time is. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to hit the subscribe button, to click the bell icon to ensure that you never miss a beat, and feel free to send me a message on Instagram to say hi. Thank you so much for watching, thank you so much to JULAPINK for providing me with these amazing vocals, and I'll see you next time.
I wonder if your therapist likes me. Guess it depends on how much of the truth you tell to her. And I wonder if your brother wants to fight me. Would he change his mind if he saw his big sister at her worst? So tell your friends I'm evil, write songs that say I suck, and roll your eyes when people ask about us. You can't hate me if it helps, make me out to be the villain, say you're better by yourself. lips.